Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sojourning Writer. Today we're going to be going a little bit more in depth on the physical character descriptions that we talked about on Tuesday. So why don't we get into it? Basically we're just going to go back over and ask a couple of questions about how we're doing our physical descriptions. This isn't going to be a very long video, but I think this is a good way that we can actually take a look at our writing and see if there are ways that we can improve it. Let's start with the first one. Does your physical description help the plot? Stephen grunted as he hoisted himself out of bed. After putting it on, he put his hands inside the shirt to stretch it out, making it more comfortable. The ice cream stain stood out to Stephen as he pulled up the jeans he bought last week, though it was even harder to button now. The only item that was older than a month was his socks. So let's break this down. Stephen hoisted himself out of bed. What are we saying here? That he was finding it difficult to get out of bed. After putting it on, he put his hands inside his double XL shirt to stretch it out, which means that his shirt, which is a double XL, is already too small. So he has to stretch it out to make it a little bit more comfortable. The ice cream stain stood out to Stephen as he pulled up the jeans he bought last week. So in addition to all of this, we're also saying that he's eating a lot of ice cream. We're pretty much saying, and that he got some on himself. That these are brand new jeans that he just bought. Now we're countering that with the fact that they're harder to button now, which means that he's gained weight recently. The only item that was older than a month was his socks. Socks are one of those things that you can keep while gaining weight. Obviously there's a limit, but somebody can, once they reach adulthood, regardless of how much they weigh, they can keep wearing the socks that they've had. So when I do this, I'm not necessarily showing, hey, all of this needs to be in there. You don't need to be this blatant when you talk about the character's weight or other physical features. One or two of these should be more than fine, and spreading them out helps you create the scene a little bit better. So when I go through these examples, it more has to do with a little bit here and there, not necessarily just blasting the physical descriptions. We want to be slowly shown what this person looks like. Watched a TikTok not long ago, and she suggested that you start off with a stereotype or a trope about how somebody looks, and then you change that stereotype over the course of the book to flesh out what you have before you, or the character that you're looking to create. The purpose is that we want to make sure that we're creating the scene as quickly as possible, or creating the visual of the character as quickly as possible for the reader. Now we can go back in later and refine how we look. We can even say, hey, he looks like a jock. But because we've started off with that visual, that what a jock looks like, we can go back in and say, hey, yes, he looks like a jock, but he does this, or he has these professions, or he does these things. Adds a little bit more to the backstory and gives us a better picture of what the character is supposed to look like. Does your physical description pull the reader from the story? We talk about having a list of what they have. Here we talk about Stephen walked in all 5'11", 275-pound frame, showed in the eyes of the crowd around him. That's a very weak way of saying that. A better way, not a perfect way, but a better way of saying that is, as Stephen walked through the crowd, he could see the worry and disgust in their eyes. He did his best to hide as much of his gut as he could. Here we're talking, well, we don't have the specifics. We have another hint that he's a larger guy, that he's self-conscious about how he looks. So that gives us a little bit more picture of what's going on in the mind of the character. So when we do these things, we're not just showing, hey, this character is seen by these people for this reason, but rather, how is the character feeling with the attention that he's getting? What's the perspective of those around him? Here we're just getting a perspective of Stephen, the main character, the person, the POV that we're looking through. We're seeing what he feels like, not necessarily what somebody else's do. Following, does your physical description need to happen now? Do we need to mention that, hey, at the beginning of the book, he has gray eyes, or he has these things going on, he looks like this, or something that we can build over time? Do we need to know until chapter 10 that he is a birthmark? The question would be, is it pertinent to the plot? Do we need to know that the main character has a birthmark before that? Do we even need to know? There are some things that don't need to be told, that don't need to be part of it. If it's important to the plot, it needs to be in the story. That's a rule that we really can't get around. The question is not that are we creating a character that people can see, but rather are we creating a character that lives and breathes in the story? That's what's most important. Not that the character is known by everybody the same way, but rather are we creating a living, breathing character for people to gravitate towards? Can your physical description be layered in with other types of description, i.e. personality description, scene setting description, political descriptions? Stephen was not disappointed when he finally met the Queen of Northumbria. The fiery passion she was known for was paled only by the red of her hair. Here we're drawing a comparison between her fiery personality, the passions that she had, and her hair. This gives us a little bit more to the character rather than just talking about her hair, just saying, hey, the Queen of Northumbria with her red hair. Here we've tied it to her personality. We're adding depth to the character and giving a little bit more about, hey, we should be expecting her to act in a specific way in the future. Now, this means that we need to make sure we're paying attention to the type of personality that she has, whether or not this is a flaw that she has to overcome, or rather this is just a part of the interactions she's going to have with other people. Whether or not she actually deals with this or she becomes more subdued has more to do with what you want going on with the plot. Do we need to have her go through a whole arc about how she deals with her personality shortcomings? Maybe. That's entirely up to wherever the story goes and wherever you feel the plot needs to go. Can your physical description be part of the dialogue? Here I have a section later on in the first book. I'm looking for a man named Stephen. We have no person by that name here, milady, the innkeep said, taking off his cap, or doffing his cap. He should be a man of girth, about his middle. If anybody should know of him, please come forward. There is reward for any information you have. What we have going here is that she's describing Stephen in a very specific way because she's seen him in a specific way. And she's using those things that would be most obvious. A girth about his middle, somebody who has weight issues, as being the indicating factor that this is the person that they're looking for. Clearly, when she asked for the name Stephen, that didn't necessarily work. A little bit of background of the story. He is actually there, but he's lost a significant amount of weight. So the indication or the physical descriptor that you use about him being overweight doesn't apply because he's lost a lot of weight. Yes, he's there, but he doesn't want to engage with this person for any number of reasons. The next one that we want to do is note that you can use physical descriptions as a way of showing the mind of the person's point of view you are seeing through. So if you have two different people and they need to see the same character in different ways, one of the ways you can do that is saying, hey, I have this person looking at the character like this. To Cassandra, Stephen's dull gray eyes belied the strength he had gained. By using the word dull, we're creating a disconnect between strength and dull gray eyes. We're essentially saying through her eyes, Cassandra's eyes, that Stephen's eyes are dull. And this kind of creates a perspective from Cassandra that we're putting on Stephen. Later on in the story, App and I watched with concern as Stephen's eyes turned from the color of steel to clouds before a storm's onslaught. Here we're saying in both instances gray. He has gray eyes. But while one person says, hey, they're dull gray eyes, just being very specific about what they look, there's no extra emotional tag or emotional tie to that story or to those descriptors. With App and I, color of steel is gray. But what are we saying here? We're saying that she sees his eyes not as something dull, but as something strength. We're seeing that strength, and she sees it in his eyes. And that strength that she sees in his eyes changes from something hard to something of warning, danger, anger. That's what we're saying here is when we say a storm's onslaught. We're creating a sense that there's going to be something that's about to pop off, and it's not going to be good for whoever Stephen's mad at. Now, one of those other things that we need to pay attention to is the words we use for descripting. Don't use words that undermine what you're trying to say. For instance, when you're talking about somebody's skin, if you want to show them as a nice person, we say, hey, they have sweet chocolate milk skin for somebody who's black. Or we have somebody with the color of sweet cream, or we're creating not just a visual representation of what they are looking like, but rather how are we actually improving those physical descriptors. We can't just say, hey, this person has dark brown skin or they have pale white skin. There's very little benefit to that. Now, if that's what we're looking to do and we want to create a otherness about it, that's a way of doing that. But when we're trying to create emotional connections between the reader and the character, we need to use very specific words about how we do that. Not to mention, we got to be careful about how we use certain phrases, because what one person sees as makes sense, another person can take offense to. Well, obviously, we need to make sure that we take people's feelings into account. We don't want to be overly worried about how some people will feel, as a lot of people seem to take offense regardless of the intention. So while it's good to take note of people's perspectives on things like race and gender and whatnot, we can't allow that to be the sole guiding factor of how we write our stories. Obviously, that does not mean that we can just be obtuse or we can be mean about how we use our descriptors, but rather, if we're doing it in a meaningful way, we should be doing it so that the story is being told, that we're giving as much information, as little as possible for the reader to know what's going on. It's like I've said before, it's always a good idea to try to write in a way where your reader doesn't realize that they are reading, that they are just taking in the story rather than reading the story. It's experiencing it, living through that story rather than just trying to figure out what this page is trying to say. Now, it's going to be difficult for those that haven't done it before. It's a lot of practice. When we first write, when we first start, and it's always the case, regardless of how much time, if you aren't making yourself clear, then people are not going to understand what you're trying to say. That's why practice is so important. All right, that's pretty much all I had for today. This was going to be a very short video anyways. So until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.